Hey, you want to hear someone talk about some video games? Good news if so, because this is the third installment in the When I Get Round to It series that covers the games that Sony published on the PlayStation. There's a lot to get through today, so I won't take up too much time here, but just to refresh everyone on how this works, number 1, first party for our purposes means did Sony publish it anywhere? Number 2, I'm arbitrarily deciding that Japanese release dates are only important if a game was only published by Sony there. And number 3, my ongoing quest is to find the scientific, mathematical answer to the question of which year had the best Sony output on this console. And the only way to do that is with critical review averages plucked from whatever online aggregator looked best to me in the moment. The science doesn't lie. Now, I have to admit something before we get started. I missed a game last time. Hiding in plain sight on the list of games developed by Japan Studio was a 1996 entry that I hadn't noted down. Before we get into 1997 proper, let's give this one last 1996 game its due. Let this be a lesson in how to avoid putting your foot in your mouth. I nearly went into this thinking it was a weird little Japanese exclusive curiosity, simply because I'd never heard of the source material, and because I missed it, of course. I guess that shows how little of a manga/anime person I really am, because Rurouni Kenshin is in fact extremely popular and well known, even if I now know I need to disavow the creator mere seconds after finding out about him. Ishin Gekitou is a fighting game based on the first 7 volumes of the manga, with a story mode taking you through the plot at presumably breakneck pace, interspersed with fights against Kenshin's enemies. You have to play as Kenshin for the first battle, but your opponent joins your side after that, and you can choose him instead if you want from then on. The fighting system is a bit weird here. The documentation I was seeing online said it was a punch-kick-guard style control scheme, but Kenshin wields a sword and definitely doesn't do any kicking, so I guess it's more like strong attack, weak attack. Basically, as Kenshin, you can just mash X to do this crazy combo and that'll get you pretty far. The other guy's a bit more interesting to control, but less broken in my experience. If you want to experiment with moves out of rolls and grapples and stuff, he'll be your pick, but be warned, it doesn't take long for the opponents to start wrecking you with crazy special moves and pinpoint precision on how to kill you. In the regular versus mode you can play as the enemies, and I like playing the Hanya man here. Thankfully I couldn't find any professional reviews for this game, so my mathematical analysis of 1996 doesn't need any adjustments. Hopefully that's me all caught up now. If this happens again, and it could well do, this is how I'll handle it in the future as well. Happy New Year 1997 everyone! Should we get started properly?
Cool borders!
Kicking things off for 1997 is a game that surprised me in some surprising ways. As I've said numerous times about other games in this series, I'd heard of Cool Borders before, but I'd never played it. Playing it myself here revealed several misconceptions I had, at least as far as this first game is concerned. I thought this was an American-developed game in the style of the Extreme series. It's not, it's Japanese. It's only published by Sony outside Japan, although hold that thought because it gets complicated later on. I therefore also thought this would be a racing game, and it isn't. To be honest, I think I was always getting this game mixed up with Snowboard Kids on N64, which I also haven't played. Instead, this is more of a score attack focused approach, where your goal is to get down the mountain as quickly as possible and perform as many tricks as possible to earn points at the end. There are a few different boards to choose from, each allegedly with their own stats, although I didn't really feel much difference. The controls always felt stiff, the terrain never worked how I expected, and I couldn't manage any tricks more complicated than a 360 grab. There's only 3 courses on offer though, so I guess you're just supposed to practice to get the most out of this. 70% on Moby Games.
Heavy corner! Carve it! No! Whoa, man! I thought you were history!
Alright, this is what we're really here for. I don't like to go all doom and gloom better in my day about video games, especially because we still haven't caught up to my own birth with these release dates, so like this literally isn't my day. But can you imagine Sony publishing a game like Carnage Heart today? This is an unapologetically complicated strategy game. Not in terms of what your goal is necessarily, it's just a case of sending units to capture enemy bases while defending yours, but because the battles between opposing forces are completely automated, you have to design and program the automation. The mechs, or OKEs, can't move, fire, dodge, anything without you setting a routine for them to follow during battle, so you'll have to predict what each OKE type's combat situation will look like during the design process. The interface makes about as much sense as you could hope for with something this complex, but thankfully you can at least get the game to generate you a working program to start from. I made this tank-type OKE that I equipped with a long-range laser weapon to pair up with the mid-range nimble walkers you're encouraged to start with, and it was genuinely exciting to realise I could turn it from miserable failure to an outright winner just by putting in a move backwards chip before firing. Naturally, it then turned out that on the practice map you could win with just the pre-built OKEs, and I didn't need to do any of that, but it was time well spent nonetheless. $67% on Moby Games. On almost the exact opposite end of the content scale from the last game, we now have Princess Maker Fairy Tales Come True, the third game in the series, originally released as a Japan-exclusive Sony-published PlayStation title. Knowing my luck, there'll be an English translation patch released for this in the near future, but for now I've used the original Japanese version and the magic of Google Translate for anything I couldn't look up myself. Downfall aristocracy indeed. The premise here, not that I realised without finding out later, is that a fairy wishes to become a human princess, and to grant that wish, she gets turned into a human and entrusted to you to fulfill the princess part. Your job is to make your adopted daughter into a well-rounded person through education, work, holidays, social life, and all the other things that humans do, scheduling her life a fortnight at a time from the ages of 10 to 17. There are 60 different endings depending on how your princess's stats turn out at the end of the game and various other factors, so that's plenty of replayability right there if you like this sort of thing. For me, I can see the appeal of the social simulation aspect, but I couldn't manage a whole game of it. I couldn't find any critical reviews for the PS1 version, so I will have to go with the Switch re-release having 58% on Metacritic, although this will not be counted in the average at the end of this video. The third volume of Namco's arcade collections on PlayStation, like so many of their games, was published by Sony in Europe. So after covering the first two last time, it's now time to pick up where we left off. The 6 games on offer here feature a lot more heavy hitters than Volume 2 did, and I'm mainly talking about Miss Pac-Man and Dig Dug there. The Tower of Draga was huge in Japan, and its iconography is all over this volume, from the CG introduction to the loading screens, so I expect they intended that game to be another massive draw, but like with Xevious in Volume 2, I'm not really sure it works if you don't have the cultural nostalgia. Pole Position 2 is an upgrade over the original with more tracks, so that's nice, and Galaxian makes sense to have in this series at some point, but it probably should have been in Volume 1 alongside Galaga. The odd one out is Phozon, an action puzzle game where you fly around as an atom to build molecules while avoiding these bad atoms. It's alright, if a bit finicky. That's the games, but the stuff around the games has also seen a big improvement over the first 2 volumes, mostly in terms of load times. Museum exhibits pop up their info boxes pretty much instantly now, which means it actually makes sense to check them out while you're wandering around. Some of the game room environments are insane this time around as well. Pac-Man Family House is extremely unsettling, the Galaxian Mothership is mesmerizing, the Draga Battlefield is intimidating, it's all good stuff. 60% on Moby Games. Not even my spell check thinks this game's title should be 2 words. Rallycross is, I guess, a game about the discipline of rallycross, 1 word, circuit-based off-road racing. I initially came away from playing this not feeling too great about it, but I've slept on it a bit and now I do get what it's going for. It's an unforgiving game, and that doesn't make for a welcoming first impression. The first track in the championship mode is a tight, twisty course with several different routes, rocks in the way all over the place, and sand dunes either side that slow you down considerably, along with the game's unique physics for jumps and your car's suspension. The camera is a bit too close and a bit too low to always be able to see what's coming, and the AI can drive more or less perfectly if they break away from the pack. Things get a bit more exciting with some of the faster tracks, and I was eventually able to win a race, thanks to the AI's ridiculous aggression on the first lap causing themselves more problems than me for once. Every track in the game can be run both forwards and backwards, which allows for the ridiculous suicide mode, where you're running in the opposite direction to 3 opponents. True to its name, the first head-on collision I suffered managed to completely crash the game. Hopefully that's more of an emulator problem. Rallycross was also among the first PlayStation games to support the dual analog controller, which wasn't even available yet when this game came out. That's the benefit of being a full first-party game, I suppose. I somehow failed to notice, even though it clearly displays the sticks in the options menu, so I was still playing with the D-pad. Oops. 79% on Moby Games. The Toshinden series rumbles on, with the third game once again only being published by Sony in Europe. It's also the last we'll be seeing these games in these videos altogether, as although there was a Toshinden 4, Sony didn't publish that one anywhere, so get your fill while you can. I didn't realise there was quite so much plot in these games, but it seems that after the events of Toshinden 2, everyone expected the fighting to be over, but a new evil force swoops in to resume the conflict, sending David Bowie and Dick Dastardly to cause trouble in a stilted CGI intro. There's actually quite a lot of change in the formula this time around. The character roster is double that of the last game, as the villains have their own model swaps of each of the standard characters, and the fights themselves now take place over a single round in completely enclosed arenas. The fact that the stages have walls now and you can't go off the edge seemed to be a selling point in the promotional material, but I actually think it makes the gameplay a bit less interesting. There were several matches I won just by comboing people off the wall, which takes longer than a ring out used to anyway, but then you have to double that time because everyone has more health to accommodate for matches not being best 2 out of 3 anymore. And in case you think the performance looks a bit choppy, I was surprised to see an option to set the frame rate. You can set it to 60 FPS if you want the speed, and it is kind of impressive to see, but the graphical downgrade is honestly kind of hilarious. %66% on Moby Games.
I won!
Somehow you can always tell when it's a Psygnosis game. Just to remind everyone, games published by Psygnosis are included in this series as well, as they were a fully owned subsidiary of Sony, despite continuing to operate in lands beyond the PlayStation, such as with this futuristic sports game that also got a PC release. The premise of League of Pain, like with a lot of depictions of futuristic sports, is that in the depraved future, nobody's interested in sports as pedestrian as basketball or hockey, and instead everyone's obsessed with this no-rules, super-violent sport where only the hardest of the hard can survive. Gameplay is basically a mixture of basketball and hockey, with a pretty rigid set of rules where you kind of want to be nimble and fast rather than big and bruising to succeed. Both teams of 4 are trying to score in a hovering goal that sits above the centre of the court, but to earn points you first have to charge up the ball by touching it against the opposing end. Once the ball is charged, you can shoot for a goal, and depending on how far from the goal you are, you'll earn more points if you get it in. You're encouraged to start fights to steal or defend, which is kind of the only time the no rules really applies. There's no concept of illegal tackles or referees in general, so mash circle if you want the ball, and you'll probably end up with it. In practice, this was all unfortunately pretty tedious to play. It just kind of felt like hockey with a couple of extra steps, and the camera and controls really messed me up sometimes. The button to charge the ball is the same as it is to pass, and the camera makes it hard to see whether you're close enough to the charge zone for it to count. So on several occasions I just bounced the ball off the wall and gave it away, and even when I did get a charge going I often couldn't tell the angle to shoot at, so I just shoot behind the goal or something. %64% on Moby Games.
A great little move there for the away side.
They're looking very strong.
Turn around.
A lovely short pass. Another brilliant goal.
Next up, another Psygnosis offering. Thunder Truck Rally is sort of a spin-off to the Destruction Derby series with the same developer and similar overall presentation. The banger racing approach has been swapped for monster trucks, hence the European title, with 2 different types of racing on offer as well as a car-crushing minigame. I'll briefly mention the car crushing. It's terrible. You just jump off this one ramp onto some cars over and over again for 60 seconds with basically no feedback as to what scores you points, but it's the finale of a championship season in this game, so I think they want it to be a spectacle. Anyway, the racing itself is also a bit wonky if you ask me. You have standard circuit races if you want, or the endurance mode, which bills itself as a pathfinding race. You basically need to pass through 8 checkpoints scattered over an open map before anyone else to win, which sounds like it should be cool, but you're basically guaranteed to lose if you try and be clever by cutting across the terrain and actually doing any off-roading. The paved roads are faster, you just gotta follow the AI and pass them before the final checkpoint. The other major downside for both types of racing that completely nerfs anything potentially interesting is your vehicle's health bar. In these rugged, all-terrain 4x4s, any contact with anything deals you a ton of damage, even the jumps that you sometimes literally have to make. That is, if the jump doesn't lead you straight into a volcano. 71% on Moby Games. Now we've got a brief interlude for some annual sports games, starting with NBA ShootOut 97. I want to try and show off the additions made to each of these when I can, or at least something different to last time, so I first went to the Custom Players menu to make one for myself. He's incredibly fast and can only shoot 3-pointers, but the Bulls turned him away for some reason. I guess I have to play more of the career mode to give my free agents a foot in the door, so another exhibition match it'll have to be. I quite enjoyed last year's game, and I'm happy to report it's all as it was for the most part, although with a greater emphasis on team management and strategy. Maybe this was in the last game as well, and I just missed it, but your players will get fatigued as the game goes on, and you can make substitutions between each quarter to make sure you're playing at your best. You can also change your team strategy during the game, although I don't actually know what these options mean. I was hoping for one that my teammates crowd the opponents on a throw-in like they started doing to me, but it turns out that's not what double team means. 83% on Moby Games.
Number 33, Alonzo Mourning. The game is tied. Showtime. Heat regain the lead.
Next up is the follow-up to Psygnosis' advertising effort cross-football game, Adidas Power Soccer International 97. A mouthful of a title, but to be honest, not much of a change over the original. This is more of an update than a sequel, if you'd even use that word for annual sports games. One reviewer went as far to say that this is nothing more than a data disc. The game advertises its features on its own intro screen. You don't have to promote yourselves, lads, I'm already playing the game. Said features include a few more licensed clubs. For example, we now have actual Arsenal instead of London Highbury, as well as Italian and Spanish league representation, and as the name suggests, 56 international teams. I set up a little tournament in arcade mode, messed up by matching the Psygnosis teams together so I couldn't tell who was who, and played a game almost identical to my experience last time. Passing is still clunky, it's still weirdly slow, shooting is practically pointless, and not even the special moves made much difference. The only goal I saw scored in any game I played came from a penalty I got at one point. So the official average is 74% from Moby Games, but if I can editorialize a bit, that was wildly overscored by the German and French magazines on offer. If we take the English reviews, which are obviously the only correct ones, it would actually be 56%.
What a superb move!
No more sports games for now, although by coincidence this is another game where the advertising is front and centre. Porsche Challenge is not just a racing game with Porsches, it's practically an entire marketing exercise for the Porsche Boxster, with Sony's European development team reportedly working directly with Porsche to make sure they got the virtual depiction of their then new model spot on. You can even choose to watch a fawning advertisement about the car's design process to get you in the mood.
The Porsche Boxster is a completely new car, from the first sketch to the last bolt. Its design is modern, but classic, emotional, and dynamic.
The game itself is, of course, a racing game with a championship mode taking you through 12 races across the USA, Japan, the Alps, and Stuttgart. What's interesting is that this is another game that fully supports the analog controller despite coming out before it, although it won't let you use the digital controls at all if you've got an analog controller connected, and it's one of those situations where the right stick does your throttle and brake, which I always find takes some getting used to. The game itself is also surprisingly tough. I won the first race without much trouble, but finishing second in the next one made me realise you can only progress by winning. In 3 attempts I couldn't manage it, the car in the lead was just too far ahead for me to catch up without driving absolutely perfectly. You can play the other tracks in the practice mode at least. I was surprised when doing the research to see so many reviewers in awe at the realism on offer with this game. And maybe it's not fair to compare to games we'll see in the future, but I mean, look at the airtime you can get here and tell me that this is realistic. 79% on Moby Games. You have to respect a game that literally titles itself Improved. It doesn't even say it's perfect, just improved. I do feel bad for Sentou Kokka Improved though, as I'm not really in the best position to say what about it is actually improved. To recap, this is a turn-based strategy game where contemporary nations war it out with cool military vehicles. I don't know if this was in the first game or not, but for the sake of variety, I went into what I assumed to be some kind of scenario mode, and picked a 3-way battle between Japan, China, and the US. Much like last time, of course, I didn't really know what I was doing. I tried moving towards the Americans in the north using my capitals units, without doing anything to my intermediary city en route, and in a stunning display of incompetence deployed a helicopter against a Chinese anti-air weapon on the southern front. I didn't technically play long enough to lose, so you can't count anything against me. I said about the last game that I'd heard rumour of how long the computer takes to make its moves in a late stage game, and I finally got a taste of that here now that I was fighting 2 opponents with several cities and units already up and running. I only squeezed 4 or 5 turns into half an hour of gameplay with all the waiting and loading going on. And woe betide if you want to watch a 3D animation of a combat encounter. Come on, fellas, I've got soldiers to send to their deaths. The only review I could find for this came from a dead citation on the series' Japanese Wikipedia article, which gave it 25 out of 40 from Famitsu, or 63%, otherwise known as the exact same as the unimproved version of this game. This is a super interesting sort of game, and exactly the sort of thing I'm glad doing this project has taught me about. Velldeselba Senki is an RPG released only in Japan, and which at time of writing doesn't have an English translation, so naturally it's not as though I got very far, but I was still impressed by what I saw here. The story takes place on the remote planet Velldeselba, where a war between 2 superpowers threatens the security and independence of the state of Neupask. You play as Misaki, a space pilot who crash lands in Neupask with no knowledge of the turmoil engulfing the planet, but who quickly agrees to help in their fight. The game is split between the 2D overworlds, where you wander around and talk to people, and the surprisingly grand 3D battle scenes, where you pilot an airship equipped with all sorts of weapons to cross oceans and take down enemies in real time. I actually think the flying segments look fantastic for the time, and the level of control you have over the ship is really impressive. It's essentially an arcade flight sim as your combat in an RPG. How cool is that? It even supports the PlayStation Flight Stick controller, which I hadn't set up for my session, and I sort of feel like I should have in retrospect. The standard controls make sense, but your target reticle is independent of your steering, and keeping the enemies on screen and in range while making sure you're not staying still was too much for my dumbass, so I ended up failing the training mission as soon as they started firing back at me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any critical reviews for this. I'm sure there are some somewhere, but I couldn't find any. Let's take a moment to recognise how neat it is that Sony took on so many games from ArtDink for international release. We saw Carnage Heart earlier, and that was one of theirs as well, but Tale of the Sun is kind of cut from similar cloth as Aquanaut's Holiday, which we looked at last time. Both games are focused on exploration of the natural world with some form of long-term objective that isn't made immediately obvious and to which you're not really signposted. Art Dink games are uncompromisingly original, and particularly silly to try and do numerical review averages with for a bit of self-reflection, which is why it's cool to see this first-party publishing label on weird projects like this. Anyway, enough navel-gazing. This specifically is a game about growing a Stone Age civilization. Starting off with a small group of cartoon cavemen who can run absurdly fast and jump absurdly high, your job is to explore, hunt, forage, and discover the secrets of the world so you can build a tower high enough to touch the tail of the sun. There's a degree of life sim going on as well. If you don't eat or sleep, you can die just as easily as getting into a scrap with boars or saber-toothed tigers. I happened to let my first guy drown, not on purpose I hasten to add, and my second expired seemingly of old age, so it turns out I'm not a good foundation for building a community. 60% on Moby Games. Talking of games that commit to a vision, here's Sentient from Psygnosis. This is a first-person adventure game set on the most comically doomed space station of all time. There's been an outbreak of radiation sickness that turns people into terrifying husks, there may be an assassin on board at the same time as political dignitaries, and it's all quickly going to become irrelevant as the station's orbit is declining and it'll plunge into the sun in 72 hours. As a medic sent on an emergency shuttle, you basically have to fix everything, as workplace politics and interpersonal relationships are preventing anyone from implementing any solutions. I'm reminded a bit of DEFCON 5 with this game's setting and tone. There's a ticking clock, you can technically do nothing and still get an ending, but to do it right you need to know where to go and what to do at specific times. The difference is that in that game you were alone and had to fight, while in Sentient there's no combat and everything is done by talking to people. There's a pretty deep conversation system at play, where you have to construct sentences and questions using building blocks of various bits of information you've picked up elsewhere. It's the sort of thing where you have to learn what the right question is before you'll be able to get any answers, and it makes for an interesting approach to what is essentially a text parser interface with extra steps. I even quite like the chunky, wobbly graphics. Sure, these people don't look like human beings, but it's kind of suitably weird for the understatedness of the various mounting threats. Nobody's that concerned by all the ways they might be about to die, and nor do they look like it. 72% on Moby Games. Another Psygnosis entry up next, but it couldn't be more different. Rush Hour, or Speedster as it's known in Europe, is a pretty simplistic top-down racing game. As the name implies, there is a sort of street circuit approach to the environments here, but it doesn't really do anything interesting with that. There's no traffic to dodge, no police to chase you like Need for Speed or anything like that, and nothing chaotic about the racing either. You just start in 8th place and have 2 laps to get to the front, and like with Porsche Challenge, you can't move on unless you win. At least in this game you get a free retry if you come 2nd or 3rd. The controller's okay, lots of reviews say it feels pretty slow, but I think it's fine for the viewpoint you have here. You basically never need to brake, so it can be pretty satisfying to make some of the tighter corners, but the digital steering controls ironically make longer, wider corners more annoying to deal with. The biggest problem with this game is the AI. On their own, they're slow and stupid, but they rubber band like crazy, and if you make a mistake, there's almost no opportunity to catch up because of how the tracks are designed. Of particular note on this is the downtown course, where the AI opponents have no idea how to get through the first corner without crashing. You can get blocked in within seconds of starting the race, and there's no way to recover from it. 59% on Moby Games.
Hurry up! We have a winner! Start your engine.
You like Japanese RPGs? You like Western RPGs? Wild Arms dares to put its peanut butter in your chocolate and be a Western JRPG. That's kind of what I expected going into this game at least. An RPG with a Wild West setting and, I hoped, some delightfully Japanese interpretations of American folklore. It's not quite as simple as that though. There is instead an interesting mix of standard fantasy and spaghetti western setting going on. Interestingly, you can decide which of the three party members to start with, as they all have their own prologues that all happen to meet in the middle once their quests begin. I mostly played as Rudy in my session, whose story begins by rescuing a lost boy from the dangerous caves near his adopted hometown, but in doing so accidentally reveals his Second Amendment rights and gets run out of town for possessing forbidden power. While wandering the towns and caves, I couldn't help feeling that there was something off about the art style of the people compared to the environment. It's like the humans are too 3D for the world around them or something. Battle scenes are full 3D, and I actually really like the way they look, weird camera angles and all. The combat system itself is pretty interesting as well, although obviously I never saw it get that complex. The more actions you take during a battle, the more your force goes up, which unlocks bonus effects for your innate abilities, such as giving your gun a lock-on. I liked what I saw here, and like with many RPGs in this series, it's a shame to have to move on so quickly. %83 on Moby Games. Getting top-tier Namco arcade ports on these lists really does feel like cheating sometimes. Once again though, Sony were responsible for bringing Soul Blade to the PlayStation in Europe. Retroactively the first game in the Soul Calibur series, and itself renamed from the arcade's Soul Edge due to justified fears of ridiculous litigation, this game essentially takes the Tekken formula and adds weapons. The controls are perhaps more traditional when compared to Tekken's unique approach. Here you've got 2 weapon attacks, a kick and a block, none of which I made particularly good use of in this footage because I'm not good at fighting games, and when I tried to learn some specials, it didn't actually tell me which buttons these were. Still, I got through the arcade mode and had some fun figuring out what I could anyway. The characters all look great, and some of the backgrounds look pretty good as well. Not all of them though, and I guess that's a sacrifice for a stable frame rate. The arcade original reviewed well, but never became a huge hit. but this home conversion was a bestseller, so without this version, there may well have never been a series at all. 89% on Moby Games. I feel a certain need to tread carefully when it comes to licensed games. The jokes I want to make about nobody knowing what the City of Lost Children is may come back to haunt me if it turns out that everyone else grew up loving the Ron Perlman movie. Nonetheless, this game is the first I've ever heard of it, and based on what I've now read about the movie, it seems like a wild choice to adapt into a video game. But then that's Psygnosis for you. This is an adventure game that takes some inspiration from obtuse point-and-clicks and some from Resident Evil, with the fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds, and tank controls. Now don't worry, I'm not going to say tank controls are bad, it's just the rest of the controls. You play as Miette, one of the children from the movie, as she seemingly just gets up to mischief to inconvenience the adults. Exploring the city is actually kind of interesting. The nature of controls and presentation like this means that it can be pretty cool just to see what sort of shot they've got lined up for you next. The trouble is that in order to progress, you need to pick up items that are completely invisible until you're standing in the exact right spot, with uses that are equally demanding of precision. You can only press X in almost the right spot and hear Miette say, "I can't do anything," so many times before you end up agreeing and siding with the watchman coming to throw her in jail. 59% on Moby Games.
Got you. And don't think I'm gonna let you off lightly. There. A few hours in the warehouse should keep you out of harm's way.
The first proper FPS on today's list. Perhaps that non-descriptive introduction says enough about Lifeforce Tenka, which is a way cooler name than the American version, don't at me. But there are a few interesting ideas here, and for what it's worth, I actually had a lot of fun with this one. In a dystopian future, the ruling mecha-corporation is harvesting humans to turn them into fearsome bionoids, and it's your job to stop them by any means necessary. Most of the time, the means of choice is standard Doom clone fare, collecting colored keycards to open doors, complete your objectives and make it to the evac point, but there's nothing wrong with familiarity if it's done well enough, and I think this fits the bill. Opening a door or turning a corner and seeing a room full of baddies to pop was pretty satisfying, although maybe that's just because I was worried they'd expect me to be better with these controls than I felt, so the fact that the auto-aim is pretty generous and the enemies themselves don't really fight back meant that my biggest issue was navigating these pretty samey level designs. I also liked that the gun has your remaining ammo display on it, because it reminded me of a Halo assault rifle. See, I can be easily pleased. 74% on Moby Games.
Racer.
The Ridge Racer series continues its proud tradition of flagship releases on PlayStation, and Sony continues their own proud tradition of bringing Namco's games to Europe with Rage Racer. Is it fair to call this the black sheep of the series? There is no game titled Ridge Racer 3 either on console or in the arcade, but later numbered titles suggest that either this game or its arcade pseudo counterpart Rave Racer should be. That change in naming convention comes with a pretty big change in presentation. The colour scheme is darker and more realistic, the soundtrack is a bit less penis music and a bit moodier, no disrespect to the earlier games, but I love the vibe of this soundtrack in particular, and the overall tone takes on that gladiatorial reverence that wankers like me have for racing and racing drivers. The structure of the game is also quite different from before. Like in previous games, you start off with a pretty slow car, but now you earn money by winning races to spend on upgrades or straight up buy new cars. If you want to be cynical about it, it is basically just how the first game did it, but with some more menus in between, but there's a decent amount of customization going on to make it feel like it's your racing team taking to the track and moving up the ranks. %87% on Moby Games.
Okay, it's the last trip. Keep it up! Finish! You did it! Great job!
Every time I saw this game on my list for this project, I forgot what it was. I was confusing it in my head with the Quest for Glory series, you know, the Sierra adventure games. I could believe that one of those got a Japan-exclusive PlayStation port. It couldn't really be more different. Don't let the point-and-click interface fool you. Quest for Fame is a rhythm game centered around the music of Aerosmith, which is going to make this segment difficult to edit. While this PlayStation version was exclusive to Japan, the original PC version did get a worldwide release, coming alongside the V-Pick, an oversized guitar pick that plugs into the parallel port for you to strum along with. I was all set to leave that there, but I found exactly one video online showing that the PlayStation version actually came with one of these as well, custom branding and everything.
This is the fun part of this game. So this item here is the virtual pick. So this is gonna imitate a guitar pick that you can use for strumming, and it has a connection to the PlayStation.
Luckily, it's not required for this version, and you can just strum with the L1 or R1 buttons instead. Luckily as well, the only Japanese text here is subtitles. Everything else is in English, so basically I've got no excuse. Practice mode involves you strumming in time with this EKG meter, and that's the gameplay. The story on offer here seems like a case of working your GarageBand up to the point of playing stadiums with Aerosmith by doing covers of their songs, which is a lose-lose scenario if you're like me and don't know any Aerosmith songs. The game seems to want you to play without the EKG, and from what I've heard it eventually forces you to turn it off, so I guess in time you just have to memorize what the game wants you to do. It seems pretty harsh, and especially harsh when the track skips every time the scene changes during a song. The average across all versions on Moby Games was 79%. The PlayStation exclusive reviews came to 90%, but there were no Japanese reviews, so I didn't know which one to go with. I've gone with the 79%.
Come on, one more chance from the top! Hey, things kind of fell apart on the verse.
Best title for a game I've ever seen, Ark the Lad Monster Game with Casino Game is an interesting little curiosity. We'll start with Monster Game because it was technically available first, if this unsourced machine-translated mention on the Japanese Wikipedia article is to be trusted. Apparently only available by lottery for those who registered their copies of Ark the Lad 2, Monster Game is essentially Pokemon Stadium. Somehow that's the second comparison made to that game in this series, but this one is more appropriate. You might remember that Ark 2 introduced the concept of taming monsters, so on this side game you can take your Ark 2 save file and battle your party against a friend, or take on the tournament to win items you can transfer back into the main game. Memory cards, eh? What a great idea. The North American release of Ark the Lad Collection in 2002 included this on a bonus disc alongside the 3 RPGs, now titled Ark Arena, but being essentially a side mode to a game already part of a compilation release, it's not as though anyone reviewed it. In Japan, the wide release of Monster Game came with a bonus of its own, Casino Game. This is just like it sounds, a selection of casino games where you start with 1,000 gold and try to win big on the slots, playing card games, virtual horse racing, that sort of thing. There's no save file tricks going on here, and it wasn't given an English localization, it's just a bit of extra distraction with an Ark flair on it if you're interested. Naturally, that means there's no reviews for this. I didn't expect that my first time being truly wowed by a game's transition into full 3D would come in 2025 with MLB 98. As you can tell from this stupid accent I'm putting on, I don't know or care about baseball, but compared to 1996's MLB pennant race, this really was night and day for me. I set up my Sox against Sox match and immediately found it clearer and, dare I say, more immersive to play than the last game. I still have my issues, some down to not understanding the sport itself of course, like I didn't realise a ball only becomes foul when it lands outside the lines, so if it gets caught out there you're still out, but the game itself got in the way on occasion as well. You can influence a pitch by holding different directions on the D-pad, and I guess it's not supposed to show on screen so that multiplayer works better, but some of my pitches went nowhere near where I expected them to. I also think the high camera angle for batting makes it way easier than the low behind the back view it gives you by default. I assume they do this because this is what it looks like on TV, but for seeing the ball's path yourself and giving you more time to react, this one's a lot easier. Anyway, try as I might with the setting on arcade and playing what seemed like an evenly matched team, I couldn't score a single point due to all of my hits flying right where my opponents needed them to. I basically just played catch with Chicago for half an hour. 80% on Moby Games.
Throw to first. Out! Now batting, John Valentine. Strike. 0-1. The windup and the pitch. Hit deep into the corner. Out. He makes the play. At the end of 5.
it funny or sacrilege to play the 50Hz PAL version of Real Bout Fatal Fury? I mean, the Japanese version is almost certainly perfectly fine for me to understand, but if you want to blame anyone, blame Sony Computer Entertainment America for advertising this port and then never releasing it for some reason. Anyway, despite that 16% slowdown that I assume is obvious if you know these games, I still had a pretty great time with this. It turns out that might have been because I was playing as a boss character and didn't realise. Sorry SNK heads, I only know the guy who was in Smash Brothers. Nonetheless, I like the lane system that brings a sort of 3D depth to a 2D plane without having to worry about an actual 3D arena. Being able to go out of bounds on a 2D fighter's stage was an interesting idea for sure. I don't know if my choice of character actually made things any easier for me, but it felt like a pretty fair difficulty in my matches overall. The AI seemed like it was prioritising a close fight rather than necessarily trying to dominate if it could. Like it would make some obviously bad moves if I had less health, and I won quite a few fights by some very slim margins. Loading times are still a problem for these SNK games, although it felt less egregious here compared to the others. %74% on Moby Games. Xevious fans are eating good on the PlayStation, it seems. I've already talked about the original game being part of Namco Museum. In fact, I mentioned that earlier in this video. But Xevious 3D G Plus is just what you'd have needed if you were a Sorvalo superfan. 3DG was an arcade game from 1996 that brought the gameplay of the original into 3D, but didn't light the world on fire in the way that Namco had hoped, not even in Japan, where it was criticised for straying too far from some of the mechanics of the original game. Even so, it got a PlayStation release, which of course had Sony's hand involved in Europe. I'm not much of a shmup guy at all, so pay no mind to my gameplay, but I like how it looks and sounds at least. PlayStation's high-res graphics mode has such a unique look to it. The plus in the title refers to how this is also an arcade compilation. The original Xevious, its hard mode conversion Super Xevious, and its 1995 remake Xevious arrangement are all also on offer if you prefer to blast and zap in 2D. It does get a bit monotonous to try everything, but what do you expect really? Gotta respect any shmup where you can replace your ship with Heihachi Tekken. 67% on Moby Games. A mini-marathon of Namco arcade games continues with the fourth installment in the Namco Museum series. By this point, almost all the true classics have already been featured, so we're getting some of the weird stuff now. That's perhaps more interesting. It would certainly be good for my gamer cred if I said something like, this is the best collection yet, but let's be honest, they were starting to get a bit desperate with these picks, so I'm going to go into a bit more detail about each one than usual. Genpei Toumaden, or as renamed internationally, the Genji and the Heike clans, is a hack and slash about making your way across Japan, killing demons, skeletons, and other monsters as you go. It's a bit of a chaotic mess, and each stage changes the playstyle. You might have a sort of Ghouls and Ghosts style, a style where the camera is zoomed way in and you can control your character's flailing sword arm, or a weird top-down view where you can still jump, but it's impossible to dodge anything. Backland is kind of misunderstood if you ask me. I don't think it has the best reputation, but if you bear in mind this predates Super Mario Bros. And was mostly made to tie in with a Hanna-Barbera cartoon series, it's better than you'd think. The aesthetic still takes some getting used to. It seems strange to imagine Pac-Man in a world with organised religion, and for some reason every port of this game tries to be clever with the controls, so here it's X and circle for left and right and you jump with the D-pad. It's fun enough once you get used to it though. Assault is another game with strange controls. A dual joystick setup being put on a controller that at the time didn't have any, but it's a tank-based shoot 'em up so you can understand how it works well enough. It was still too much for me to think about as soon as enemies turned up in any real numbers though. Ordyne was the standout game for me. A horizontal shooter where you earn crystals by killing a complete wave of enemies, and use those crystals as currency in the shop that appears every so often to buy power-ups and other upgrades. It's not that much like Fantasy Zone, but it's what I was thinking of with the shop mechanic, the bright colours, and the light-hearted tone. Comical shooting game indeed. The Return of Ishtar.
3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, and... These men are pawns.
Is a sequel to the Tower of Draga, which featured in Volume 3. It's a dungeon crawler again, but it plays pretty differently, and I would say for the better. The action is more zoomed in and the environments are more open, but in a strange choice you have to control two characters mapped to the same controller. The D-pad controls Ki, the magic-wielding priestess, while the face buttons control Prince Gilgamesh, who fights with a sword that he draws automatically. I'm sure in later stages combat becomes more important, but for the first few areas I was perfectly comfortable just making sure Gil stayed on screen while shooting enemies with Ki's fireballs. Strange setup with it being one controller. You'd think they want two players to share or something, but R1 is used to select Ki's spells, so I don't think they actually do expect co-op. The museum presentation is as strong as ever, using the same improved setup as Volume 3. The Ordyne area was just a nice place to be, Pac-Land's beach was nice, and the assault battlefield with the airlock was pretty cool as well. There's also a couple of secrets in this volume that affect the museum, like turning Return of Ishtar's room blue and converting the game to a one-life run with all items, or this mysterious empty room that with a button combination actually reveals Assault Plus as a hidden extra game. With the presentation improving like this, it's just a shame there's no heavy hitters of included games. %61 on Moby Games. Did modern American football games still open on live-action shots of future CTE issues? Some of these hits are brutal. Anyway, NFL GameDay 98 is the next entry in Sony's take on the sport, and it continues the trend we saw earlier with the MLB game by moving to full 3D graphics. Fingers crossed for no more of Sony Interactive Studios America's house style of 2D sprites on weird scaling backgrounds. Not to be a graphics nitpicker, but I never liked that. Anyway, seemingly the bigger change as far as Sony was concerned for this year's game was total control passing, adding the ability to throw long or short when passing. You might remember that I couldn't even figure out regular passing in the previous games, so I went for an arcade setting and hoped that the 3D would improve my experience just like it did with MLB earlier. Well, sorry, especially if you're a Jaguars fan, but no such luck. I'll accept fault for some of these as just being impatient and throwing into a crowd of defenders, but I need to figure out what the timing is on the catch button because I don't get what I'm doing wrong half the time. 84% on Moby Games.
Incomplete pass. Third and 10. Incomplete pass. Fourth and 10 on the 24-yard line. Michael Dean Carroll.
Maybe it's because I've played too many 80s arcade games in a row, but if you told me that Roscoe McQueen Firefighter Extreme was a 3D reimagining of one as well, I think I'd believe you. I could see a sort of Burger Time style game where a little fireman runs around making sure all the fires are extinguished. But no, as far as I know, this is an original creation for the PlayStation, and it's not one that really clicked with me, unfortunately. I don't mind the concept. A devious arsonist has a skyscraper in his sights and sets his robotic minions to task with burning it all down, so it's up to Giga Chad, Fireman Sam to fight the fires and the bad guys alike. The way the game actually works is just a case of entering a room, using your axe to destroy the robots, switching to your hose to put out the fires their bombs start, and then mopping up hell for water refills and looking around for any victims to rescue. Room after room of that, in fact.
Hello, help!
Wait, what are they saying?
Hello, help!
Hang on, this is the laundry stage, isn't it? Oh god, it's even got that riff in the music. What's that called again?
Check the map.
Oh. 67% on Moby Games.
Zone clear. Thank you very much, Mr. McQueen.
This feels like a game trapped between two worlds. Steel Rain, in terms of presentation and gameplay, wouldn't feel out of place in a lineup of 1995 or 96 games, with its FMV cutscenes and relatively simplistic gameplay evoking games like Warhawk or Crazy Ivan. It's not quite as cheesy as Crazy Ivan, but I did like this harrowing scene where the bad guys shut down a news broadcast reporting on the devastation of the city from a nearby hiking trail.
As of yet, there is no sign of reaction from the Government Department of Defense. I will keep you updated with the latest.
Yeah, we're shutting you down here. It's occupied territory.
I have a right to be here.
Shut up.
Hey, leave her alone.
Oh, you want some, buddy?
Despite all those indicators that this is a bit of a dated experience, one thing this game does have is full dual analog controls, which, being a tank combat game, is a nice feature to have, Namco Assault. I played terribly inefficiently though because I couldn't get my head around directional controls with a turret facing anywhere other than straight ahead. Still, the first stage was almost comical in how fast I could zoom over the terrain and blow up the objectives, and I was prepared for a bit of mindless fun. The second stage was instead a big boring maze where the enemies can shoot you around corners and they stop giving you shield power-ups right when you might actually need them. The hover tank with its strafe ability really messed with my head on these controls as well. Maybe this DualShock business isn't all it's cracked up to be after all. %59 on Moby Games. And so I find myself with the Herculean task of finding something unique to say about Final Fantasy VII. I can at least talk about this one from experience. I sat down and played through it for the first time last year, and I had a wonderful time with it. Don't let anyone tell you this game hasn't aged well, or that you need the modern re-releases with their speed-ups, random encounter blockers, instant heals, and so on. As a game, the things you might look at with 2020's eyes and call limitations provide for methods of storytelling that are essentially no longer possible. Pre-rendered backgrounds moving seamlessly to CGI videos taking full advantage of their interface was a trick that decades later still impressed me, and real ones will know what I mean if I say the words "shut up." Playing this game myself was kind of what got me to start this video series at all. Outside Japan, this game that defined the PlayStation, arguably made this console brand the success that it continues to be, was published by Sony themselves. Final Fantasy VII is a perfect example of what I said in the first video in this series. Sony couldn't rely on their games alone to make their console a success, not yet anyway. So they had either the benefit or the burden of publishing games that they felt had an audience, and I can't think of any game that paid off quite as well as this. That push from the platform holder made this game, this franchise, this genre mainstream in the West, and arguably invented the genre where Europe is concerned. That's not a bad thing for any game's CV. 92% on Metacritic. Ray tracing on PlayStation some 23 years before the PS5. I don't actually know why this game is called Ray Tracers, but this Taito developed game was published by Sony in Europe after being self-published in Japan and before THQ took it on for a North American release in 1998. This is almost, but not quite, a 3D remake of Chase HQ, an 80s arcade game also made by Taito, where the objective is to drive at high speeds, crash into enemies and obstacles for bonus points, and make it to the end of the stage before time runs out to fight a boss. It's extremely short and not exactly complicated to play. All you can do is drive and boost, so you win the game by driving and boosting into things, but I had some fun with this anyway. Perhaps it's because I picked the red car, or the Spanker as it's called, but I couldn't help comparing it to Outrun, with its incredibly fast pace and slightly strange steering controls that are still really satisfying to get right. Bosses are pretty cool as well. Absolutely no idea what the plot is or why we're fighting these guys at all, but the absurdity of fighting tanks, helicopters and rocket-equipped SUVs in the style of Sonic Advance 2 was enough to carry it for me. It can get pretty climactic when you win with seconds to spare as well. %67 on Moby Games. It feels at least slightly noteworthy that this is the second Taito game in a row to be published by Sony in Europe and titled Ray Something, and that this is part of a series of loosely connected games titled Ray Something, and yet Ray Storm and our previous game Ray Tracers have nothing to do with each other. This is an arcade shooter taking heavy inspiration from the Xevious series. I really didn't expect so much of this formula today, and I think it benefits from being inspired by those games rather than a direct adaptation like Xevious 3DG was. The presentation is impressive from the word go. Lots of polygonal models and laser effects flying about with a near solid 60 FPS, and the music is excellent as well. I do wish the ships were a bit more nimble, as basically my only complaint is that they sometimes felt a bit sluggish to get out of the way of enemy fire, but other than that it's a good setup. 2 ships to choose from, with slightly different weaponry and a super attack you charge up by using your ground-based lock-ons. Like a lot of console arcade ports, this version offers an extra mode that tailors the experience a bit more to the console, by updating the graphics, although I struggle to notice much difference, changing the enemy patterns, and toning down the music slightly. That alone makes me prefer the original arcade mode. 77% on Moby Games. I'd love to know the politics behind Sony doing a kart game rather than an indie racing league one. I'm glad they did though. While I'm not so European as to be unable to appreciate oval racing, an entire game of that would be a bit much. Kart World Series is that funny sort of licensed sports game though, where they've either only got or only used some of the license. So there's 15 drivers and 10 tracks in the real season, but I'd say they got the heavy hitters from each at least. The driving feels okay, it's a bit clumsy at low speed, and sequences of corners on the road circuits can get you pointing some funky angles sometimes, but with analog stick support and a lot less bouncing from the car, I think it's slightly better than Psygnosis' Formula 1 in some ways. It's a similar story with the AI. Sometimes you can get some pretty thrilling races with them, other times it's like you're not even there. It's kinda cool that they can make mistakes on their own though. F124 can't even manage that. %71% on Moby Games. The polygonization of Sony's sports titles continues with NHL FaceOff 98. This is a series I've generally been enjoying just for the potential chaos of hockey as a sport, so I was excited to see how they adapted to this new style. This time I did figure out how to make a custom player and sign him to a team, so it was the Ducks versus the Lightning in a duel hopefully a bit less one-sided on the ice than it would be in a pond. While I still enjoy playing these games for the fast-paced action, I never know exactly why a shot succeeds or not, so I was a bit concerned to go a goal down just seconds into the game. Still, I got in a couple of fights, had some chases up and down the rink, and generally had a good time even though I was losing. I don't remember having so much of a problem with defense in previous games, but I kept finding myself incessantly switching players rather than actually doing something useful. Anyway, in the final period, I realised my secret weapon hadn't been deployed yet, so in came Hock E. Puckerman himself to pile on the pressure. It wasn't to be as far as the victory, but the kid did good.
Anaheim goal, Teemu Selanne, assisted by number 69.
75% on Moby Games. If you wanted to make some joke about how any successful game is guaranteed a sequel, I'll tell you now to hold off, because Discworld 2 is more than happy to make those jokes for itself. I don't want to start off on a strange tone here, but it is almost off-putting how many times they reference this game's existence as being a safe way to make some more money off a popular marketable brand. Like, did you guys want to make this game or not?
No, it's not dangerous, it's the start of the game. They can't kill us off yet. I suppose you have a list of mysterious ingredients that I now have to run off and collect.
What? How did you know that?
I just had a dreadful suspicion. They've probably halved the number of insane object puzzles for a start. Sorry, I mean clever lateral thinking exercises, of course. Aren't you going to miss all this stuff when they stop making these games? Aren't you just going to miss it all?
As lampshaded during the intro, the production values are definitely higher this time around, with a fully animated cutscene and a musical number to kick things off. As the subtitle of this sequel implies, the story revolves around the disappearance of Death thanks to Rincewind's bumbling. The dead continue to walk the Discworld in his absence, and so the wizards need to perform a ritual to try and bring him back. This being another point-and-click adventure, your job is to go around and collect items by doing slightly ridiculous things for people until you have what you need to progress. I opted to use the mouse this time for a bit of variety, even if at that point I may as well have been playing the PC version, but in general this is a case of it not being broken so not fixed. Things are a bit less obtuse in terms of puzzles compared to the first game, and it's nice to be able to explore more of the world more quickly. Even if you weren't following a guide, I think you would have more to see in this game just from the variety of environments and people you can see, and once again get Eric Idle to describe for you. %80 on Moby Games.
I don't believe this. You mean to tell me that art has to take a second place to cheap licensing and marketing? Well, I can tell you that I'm above that sort of thing. Catch me being involved in some damn licensing scam? Ha! Fat chance. The last thing I'd ever do is allow myself to become involved in a shabby marketing ploy designed to use a famous name to sell a product which is in itself utterly devoid of any real... Right. Well, good luck with the career and I'll be off.
Did we mention the range of...
Linda3 Again!
If you're not spending the days praising fan translations of games like this, what are you doing? Linda3 Again is the expanded PlayStation version of a PC Engine CD game simply titled Linda3, but neither of those versions, nor the Saturn Complete Edition that released later, were available outside Japan until this fan translation in 2024. Imagine, if you will, a combination of Majora's Mask, Monster Hunter, Pokemon, and the Book of Genesis. 8 years from now, a massive meteor is going to impact the planet Neo Kenya, with extinction-level consequences that will render the planet uninhabitable for millennia. Luckily, God himself has sent a method for life survival in the form of the Astro Ark, alongside a commandment etched into stone. The Ark is to be populated by one male and one female of every species of animal on the planet. The human pilots are decided, the rookie ranger Ken and his sort of girlfriend Linda. It's up to them to capture and store as many of Neo Kenya's animals as possible, which naturally is done by fighting with them. Battles are turn-based with all the trappings you'd expect, but it's in your interest to try and get the hostile creatures down to low HP without killing them, as animals are also an important resource for things like food and crafting new weapons or armor, and they're no good for that dead. Don't dilly-dally though, because that timer is always ticking, and you need to be off-world when the meteor strikes. There's quite a lot going on here, as you can see. The Ark program is politically controversial among the people of this world. The animals are arbitrarily considered as multi-purpose tools or friendly companions in a way that I assume is commenting on meat eating. And then there's the matter of Linda herself, a Beastian, whose people believe that they are the original inhabitants of the planet, evolving alongside the animals, unlike the immigrants who now run things. Like with almost every RPG I've played in this series, it's a real shame to have to leave it here. I can only find 2 reviews, 78% from Famitsu, and a French magazine that gave it 10%, saying that only the first hour was exciting at all. 44% felt editorially wrong though, so I'm going with 78%.
I slam my penis in the car door. You slam your penis in the car door.
You gotta do what?
I gotta believe.
A smart person would write this whole section to scan as a rap beat. A smarter person knows his limits and just does it normally. PaRappa the Rapper is one of the true PlayStation classics, with its striking graphical style, simple yet challenging gameplay, and ridiculously catchy soundtrack. This is a rhythm game through and through, in fact arguably the first ever, which hadn't really occurred to me. The setup is pretty simple. Each stage has PaRappa accomplish his goal by matching the lines his teachers rap as closely as possible, but there's a few things about this game that make it pretty unique even with that basic outline in mind. The first is that the timing is extremely strict and not always obvious. Depending on who you ask, this is either a consequence of not playing on a CRT and the inherent lag you get, or it's just how the game works. But either way, you probably want to press the button slightly before it looks like you should, just to compensate. The other unique thing is the freestyle aspect. Unlike a lot of other rhythm games, you don't have to stick to what the on-screen prompts tell you to do. As long as you keep to the beat, you can rack up the points by doing whatever you want beyond the required inputs, which I was only really comfortable doing on the iconic Master Onions rap. How do I build up the confidence to do better? I gotta believe.
Duck punch.
86% on Moby Games.
Butter joins the bowl.
We're making us a cake that you've never seen before.
Make us a cake that you've never seen before. We're making.
Every single day, stress comes in every way. I ain't got no time for nobody. My style is rich, dope, fat, and witch. We'll make a cake today that looks rich.
The runaway success of Psygnosis' first F1 game means it joins the ranks of PlayStation annual sports titles, albeit by skipping the 1996 season. Formula 197 is more than just an asset flip though. Like all good sequels, it expands on what the first game did and makes for a more robust experience as a result. The noticeable change is analog stick support, although as this game still uses the engine from the earlier game, no pun intended, it's not as massive a change as you might expect. Compared to the last game, the cars do feel a lot more grounded though. You're not going to be bouncing around in the middle of a corner quite so much, which means I feel a lot more comfortable going fast, even though the controls are pretty much the same. As was the case with a lot of early 3D racing games, the collisions were another major feature in the advertising. It seems funny considering that by default the game sets flags as on, so if you see any collisions close up you'll be getting in trouble for it, but yeah, they are definitely improved. No more weird rubbing together until you stop. The presentation remains top-notch, with the on-screen graphics and commentary true to what you'd have seen on TV at the time. I do wish they'd shut up a bit during qualifying laps though.
This year, all the teams have lowered the driving seat to try and combat the turbulence caused by the driver's helmet, which reduces the efficiency of the air intake into the engine. Another benefit they hope to see will be better handling of the car due to the lower centre of gravity.
Down into second!
87% on Moby Games.
He's collided with Irvine! He's lost the place to Eddie Irvine!
A bit of dodgem cars going on out on the track today.
Race order. In first place, Michael Schumacher. Second, Gerhard Berger. Third, Giancarlo Fisichella. Hang on. He's hit the Canadian. Excellent.
Only high IQ gamers need apply. The first true puzzle game we've seen in the series so far, Intelligent Cube is, at least to me, one of the really iconic PlayStation games. The visual of an impossibly tall structure made only of cubes and a little man running around while they roll towards him certainly makes an impact the first time you see it. It's not like the guy has no power in the situation though, as the objective here is to mark squares that the grey cubes are going to roll into and activate them to clear the cubes before they get to the end, and especially before they take you with them. The green cubes are known as advantage cubes, clearing them sets a marker for a 3x3 area you can clear all at once, while the black forbidden cubes must not be cleared and simply allowed to fall off the edge. And that's basically the entire game, just different patterns of cubes coming towards you to work out how to clear. If you clear every cube you're supposed to and let every black cube go, you gain an extra row of platform to work with, but the reverse applies as well, so it doesn't take too many mistakes before you're in a really tough situation. As you go, the puzzles naturally get more complicated and the rows of cubes get longer, so your job gets complicated to match. It's still a ton of fun though. 75% on Moby Games. Here's a game that I grew to understand, but never really grew to like. Rapid Racer is a bit of a stealth pun of a title, as this is a powerboat racing game, with races taking place primarily on the waterways of North America, which is weird considering this is a game developed in Europe and not released outside Europe for over 9 months. Anyway, I like to think I have a soft spot for water-based races, but this game never felt quite right to me. It runs at a smooth 60 FPS, which is impressive, but the control felt weird and loose the whole time I was playing. The eponymous rapids kind of flow like lanes down a highway, and once you're in a lane, it really fights you if you want to try and get out. In the meanders, those lanes are still in place as well, so you're trying to steer through the corner while the circuit itself is trying to push against you. And if the wall is any sort of bank onto the land, you better pray you don't touch it. The trouble with this is there are pickups all over the place as well. Different coloured chips that can give you turbo, pause the countdown timer, actively impede you, or these yellow ones that take you to a bonus game to unlock upgrades for your boat if you get enough and win the race. Like I say, I grew to understand how this worked, and I started winning races once I put it down to easy, but give me Hydro Thunder any day. 70% on Moby Games. Next up, one of the signosisiest games to ever do it. G-Police is one of those zeitgeist games for this exact period of gaming history. Full motion video cutscenes telling a story that's not the most unique but commits to it wholeheartedly, gameplay focused on one thing that is infinitely improved by being on the PlayStation compared to anything older, and then that gimmick still not controlling or performing terribly well, and then getting away with all of it because it's cool as hell anyway. To expand on what I just said there, this is a story set in a dystopian future where capitalism has gone interplanetary, and government only exists to maintain order in the space colonies, while they strip everything else in the solar system bare, just like we already did to Earth. You play as Slater, who joins the G-Police to find out the true story behind his sister's death, but the gameplay is all about flying cool gunships around extraterrestrial cities. I don't know if this is controversial, but I found the first-person camera made things absolutely uncontrollable, so I played with the chase cam and had a much easier time for it. There's nothing about the way this game controls that I can point to and say, this is wrong. It's all sensible enough, but it's still kind of weird in the heat of combat or maneuvering. Luckily, I think they knew that, and it doesn't feel like you're given impossible tasks for the level of control you have. It's like the game is structured around the idea that you'll overshoot things with the throttle system, take some fire from things you have to fight, or get caught out by the infamously poor draw distance. Well, the early part I played anyway. This is a 2-disc epic after all. %83 on Moby Games. I'm once again reminded of a big part of the mission statement for this series, finding out which games Sony felt strongly enough about to bring to parts of the world that might have otherwise missed them. You can imagine a world where Bushido Blade remained a Japan-only curiosity, but Sony brought it worldwide to make sure everyone got a taste of one of the most unique fighting games on the PlayStation. This is a weapons-based fighter that takes that premise seriously. No health bars, juggling combos, or magic special attacks here, just a test of timing and positioning to land a killing blow. A match can be over in seconds if you get it right, but if you're able to master the combat style with its blocking moves, different strike options, and stances to further change what you're doing, any fight can also become an incredibly tense several-minute affair. You'll have to take my word for it, the multiplayer in this is a lot of fun, as I don't lumber my friends with having to record footage with me, but the single player has a few interesting things going on as well. In the story mode, you're encouraged to follow the practices of the Bushido Code by fighting fairly, no backstabs or jump starts. The slash mode is sort of a horde mode, where you have to see how many foes you can take down in one life, while the POV mode is like the epitome of completely pointless, but I'm glad it's here. It looks so cool until you see what it looks like in the replay. %78% on Moby Games. We haven't seen a Namco game in some time, but here's another that Sony brought over to Europe, and talk about a glow-up of a sequel. Ace Combat 2 makes the original Air Combat, which yes was called Ace Combat in Japan, look like a tech demo. At its core, the gameplay is pretty much the same. Once again, you're given a handful of targets to take out per mission, and your choice of which plane to do the job. Completing missions unlocks new planes to buy with the earnings you get based on your performance in each mission, and each plane has different strengths and weaknesses. It's just that Ace Combat 2 streamlines the experience so much that it manages to make even the menus exciting. Presentation is a lot more dynamic, with this cyber war room vibe to the mission briefings, and fully voiced descriptions of your objectives with a 3D map. In flight, the environmental graphics are so much better than before, but with no sacrifice in frame rate, super impressive stuff. The controls are also improved dramatically by simply adding analog stick support, although if you told me it was sped up since the first game as well, I'm not sure I'd doubt you. The music ties it all together. Accelerating over the harbour to take out an aircraft carrier with its insane rock synth blaring might just be the coolest thing I've ever done in a video game. 85% on Moby Games. Get your sea legs on, it's time to go a plundering. Overboard, otherwise known as Shipwreckers, is a cute little game from Psygnosis, ostensibly about cartoony naval combat that's actually more of a dungeon crawler in disguise. You're not really setting sail on the high seas, instead you're making your way through a series of canals, hemmed in by islands and towns, and solving basic puzzles to open gates and move on. Your actual objective on each stage is just to pick up all the bottles containing pieces of the map, which opens a big purple exit portal. Of course, you have to do a bit of cannon fire every so often, as enemy ships or land-based defences will sometimes be blocking your way. They give you a comical amount of ammo for these brief encounters, and I found it wasn't too hard to just get them stuck on the walls and unable to defend themselves. No, the biggest problem I had with this game was these saw blades. They show up unexpectedly and somehow manage to pop in even though this is an overhead view, and they deal so much more damage than anything else I saw. Not even getting set on fire was as bad. The crew seemed to have more fun with that anyway. %72% on Moby Games.
Welcome to the League of Free Worlds Information System.
To take you behind the scenes a bit, the process for these videos involves me playing a block of 4 games, then writing about those 4 while they're fresh in the mind. I mention this because I played Colony Wars in the block after G-Police, and I'd like to rescind quite how much I gassed that game up and put most of the praise here instead. They're both flight combat story-focused games from Psygnosis, but Colony Wars is a genuinely incredible experience. In the 47th century, an interstellar war is being waged between the Earth Empire and an alliance of rebel colony planets known as the League of Free Worlds. The Empire against the rebels doing space battles with dogfighting and big spherical battle stations, is it? Derivative or not, what makes this game is the way it feels to play. The flight controls feel so satisfying. I don't know whether you call it true 6 degrees of freedom, but it feels great with the analog controls, and maneuverability, even in the heat of battle, is a cinch. The scale of these environments is insane. I'm sure there's a boundary somewhere, and you're just naturally kept inside it by the enemies you're chasing around, but it feels as though you've got all of space to play with, should you catch a glimpse of the backgrounds with their planets, stars and nebulae. There's depth to the story as well. Failing a mission doesn't end the game, and there's a ton of different ways the story can play out depending on your performance at certain key branching points. A real treat to get to play this. 91% on Metacritic.
Surrounding area clear. Well done, mission complete. Come back on board.
Crash Bandicoot 2. Cortex Strikes Back.
Cards on the table right away, this is my favourite of the Crash platformers. If there's any game that defines the sequel mantra of expand what worked the first time and ditch what didn't, Crash Bandicoot 2 is it. Some of the changes are obvious. Crash's model is more detailed, more expressive, and more animated. There's a greater emphasis on the plot, paper-thin though it is, that gives the characters more personality than they did in the first game. And there's more variety in the levels, as this is now a globe-trotting adventure, rather than limited to a tropical island setting. There's also the standard sequel things, like new moves for Crash to use. You can probably tell I have a particular affinity with the slide and high jump for the utility during platforming sections alone, but it's the improvements to the level design, and particularly the secrets, that really do it for me. The first level is all you need to see this in action. You have this section which requires a new belly flop move to access, which also introduces the nitro crate and all the opportunities that has for obstacles, but then you're also asked to subvert the usual playstyle by breaking no boxes instead of all of them for an extra gem. Other levels offer speedrun challenges, hidden passages for those with the curiosity to find them, or tantalizing rewards dangled in front of you that you'll need to find a different path to later. It's that hidden depth in these stages that might otherwise look like linear corridors that's always fascinated me about this game. 85% on Moby Games.
Cool Borders!
Yep, we saw Cool Borders at the start of this video, and now we have its sequel. While the original was a 1996 release in Japan, both games saw a Sony-published international release during 1997. I'm pleased to report that with Cool Borders 2 there is actually a video game here, even if it's still not one I happen to enjoy all that much. The way things are set up here is you have a pair of events in each round. First you have to do a trick competition, which scores you based on things like speed, rotation, the complexity of the trick and so on. I wasn't very good at this. The total of your trick scores is then ranked against 7 AI opponents, if you can imagine such a thing, and your rank in that field determines how long you'll be waiting at the starting box for the second event, a downhill race. If you do the best tricks, you get to start first, but if you're like me, you'll be about 20 seconds behind before you even start. The race controls about the same as the first game, but luckily tricks no longer come into it. All that matters is where you finish. Your race results give you championship points, and you need to reach a point threshold to move on. It might seem like I've over-explained that, but it's only because the game itself is the same weirdly stiff and pretty slow affair as before. It's just nice to have some actual structure around that now. $75% on Moby Games. I feel slightly sorry for Jet Moto 2, in that I wanted to argue against the idea that this is a pretty safe sequel without much to set it apart, and actually found when writing this that those who said that might have had a point. There's 10 new tracks to play, but with all the tracks from the original available to unlock as well, that means the racing can't change too much, and at its core it hasn't. If anything, the new tracks don't utilise the magnetic grapple mechanic quite as much as the first game, and with a physics change that makes your vehicle stay upright a little easier, you won't be controlling the lean so much either. It doesn't take long before the new tracks go a bit hard on suspended obstacle courses over bottomless pits though, and that leads me to talking about the game's producer, Brian Wicklum. On his blog he talks about how he hated the first Jet Moto, and when assigned the producer role for this game he had certain things he wanted to change. The course design came from his belief that the game should combine racing and platforming, and it was also his idea to slash the grid size in half, so there's only 10 racers instead of 20. This was apparently to make the game accessible to a less hardcore racing market, and maybe it's because I am a hardcore racing market, but that doesn't make any sense to me. 64% on Moby Games. Now, I'm going to break with the format for a moment here. This isn't its own entry on the list, but I wanted to mention the oddity that is Jet Moto 2 Championship Edition. The greatest hits version of Jet Moto 2, only in North America, has some pretty substantial changes. All the tracks are unlocked from the start for one, but the biggest change is the game now runs 50% faster at a whopping 30 frames per second, albeit at the expense of cutting the number of races down to just 4. According to Wicklem, this version of the game was something he asked the team to make just so that he could see the game running at a faster speed, and was impressed enough by the result that when Jet Moto 2 got re-released he wanted it to be this version. Sony refused, as policy at the time was that re-releases had to be the same version of the game, but, at least if Wicklem is to be believed, the branch of Sony that manufactured the discs accidentally duplicated this version of the game anyway, so here we are. Bonus game for us all, sort of. Sony continuing to publish the PlayStation versions of the Broken Sword games must have felt like some karmic justice. According to series director Charles Cecil, the PlayStation version of the first game, which was originally released by Sony in Europe, accounted for about half of the total sales, despite low expectations. The same release strategy applied for the sequel, which sees the continuing adventures of George Stobart and Nico Collard as they investigate a mysterious Mayan artifact. Adventure games are probably only second to RPGs in being a weird genre to truly try and get a sense for in this sort of format, but I will say the initial pace is higher in this one. The performance troubles that plagued the PlayStation version of the first game look to be solved as well, as loading times are a lot more bearable and there's no more stutter to the way everything else runs. Apparently this game had nowhere near the budget of the first, so I think this is a case where the game itself might not be as strong, but the PlayStation version is a lot better of a port. %77% on Moby Games.
There was nothing in the case but styrofoam packing. But pasted on the side was the remains of a label.
The history and variety of Disney games on this console is a very well-trodden topic, but what's relevant to me here is that Sony themselves were often pretty keen to publish games based on Disney's films and properties. We've already seen Mickey's Wild Adventure, but while that seemed to be one they could still publish given they'd previously done the last-gen version, Hercules, or to give it the full name treatment, Disney's action game featuring Hercules, is a licensed tie-in game to a movie that had only just come out, and Sony brought it to Europe. This version, anyway. The PC and Game Boy version still came out over here as well, but whatever. I'm just going to be honest, I didn't really enjoy playing this, and I'll happily keep talking around it if I can. This is a 2.5D platformer, in the sense that you can step between different Z-axis layers on occasion, and honestly, this style is the best thing about the game. The trouble is, I think you can tell how experimental this sort of thing was at the time, so the timing can get pretty precise if you're trying to hit something that's moving in 3D past you, like these spinning training dummies. Hercules himself runs a bit too fast for how much stuff is on the screen, and he has this bizarre feeling in the air in particular that makes jumping feel awful. This issue of unclear speed and depth perception is only heightened during the on-rails 3D stages, where you can't tell where you are in relation to any obstacles, and not even the drop shadow helps. Lastly, I shouldn't hold this game or Danny DeVito responsible for the reaction I had to hearing his voice lines in this game for the first time in a decade, but if you shared my YouTube habits back then, I know you'll feel the same.
Rule number 95, kid. Concentrate. What are you doing? Get your sword!
76% on Moby Games.
Hercules! Hercules! Hercules!
Time crisis.
Your father will pay the price for destroying the Imperial rule!
This setup's not going to work for this, is it? Time Crisis isn't the first light gun game we've seen so far, but it is the first from Namco, which means Sony in Europe, and it means that they can happily assume you've got one of their guns to use with it. You can use a normal controller, but it's a comically bad choice for this game, and there's no mouse support, so I don't really have another option here, do I? Yes, this is really how I'm showing this. I'm sorry, my phone was as good as I could do it, and I'll try and use B-roll where you can sort of see the screen. This is arcade shooting gallery at its very best, with bright colours, loud gunshots and explosions, a pumping soundtrack, and wave after wave of enemies to gun down. The announcer's calls of action really say it all. Not only is this an action-packed romp through the enemy's castle to rescue the president's daughter, but with that one word you also get the main gameplay gimmick. Once you move to a new position, you have to manually leave cover to shoot. Staying in cover lets you avoid enemy fire, and you have to duck into cover to reload, but you literally control the action otherwise. If you master the arcade mode, like I didn't, there's also the special mission, which tells a separate story and makes it a full console experience with mission briefings, a map, and branching paths. Pretty solid stuff. %83 on Moby Games. My personal torment of football games that are clearly well made and well loved but make no sense to me continues with NCAA GameBreaker 98. The series continues to apply a college football skin to the core of the NFL series, which I'm sure is reflected in the actual gameplay if you know the differences between the disciplines well enough, but for me it just means we've got the impressive 3D evolution we saw earlier with some different team names. This also brings in the total control mode, so I thought I'd give that a go and see what it does. Oh no, I'm in way over my head with this. Put me back to the normal controls. Wait, did I finally complete a pass and make an actual gain? Am I getting somewhere with this? Oh no, of course not. 86% on Moby Games.
With the tackle. 3rd and 8.
Hot! Hot! Red 22! Hot!
5-yard gain on the line.
Back to where it all began, at least for a moment. Crime Crackers was the first game Sony published on the PlayStation back in 1994, so with almost 3 years of experience with the system, let's take a look at the sequel. The production values have definitely risen, with animated and voiced cutscenes, including a proper opening with theme song. I've no idea if this comes from the source material or not. Like I mentioned with the first game, it's surprisingly difficult to look anything up about this manga, and even more so thanks to today's evolutions in technology. We follow a different cast of characters this time, but the core of the game is pretty similar. It's a first-person dungeon crawler with real-time combat, where the idea is to explore the enemy base, take out any enemies you come across, and do some light puzzle solving to get items and push onwards. You run with a party of 4 this time instead of 3, although unlike the first game, I really only got much use out of one character, as she's the only one with a reliable projectile attack. The basic attack also thankfully doesn't use ammo anymore, so you can't leave yourself with no way to attack later on. Once I beat the boss, a countdown started, which left me assuming I had to run back to the entrance to escape or something like that, but I got lost and I didn't get game over or anything, so I'm not sure what that was actually about. Apparently there's some branching story stuff going on here, so it might be that. I couldn't find any critical reviews for this. On Amazon, the user review average is 88%, and I found a single blog post from 2007 that gave it 7 out of 10. It's rough out there. Not to be confused with Shadow Man, as I kept doing every time I saw this game on the list, this is Shadow Master by Psygnosis. In a pattern I wasn't expecting, this is the 3rd game from Psygnosis in this video alone where the story involves an industrious empire stripping their planet of all natural resources and going on a spacefaring expedition to take everyone else's. But in this game, it's aliens attacking populated worlds instead of setting up mining colonies, so it's time to get into your Blaster Master tank and fight back. This is a genuinely impressive looking FPS, with lots of 3D models and neat coloured lighting effects, and it all runs smoothly as well. There's a cool sense of speed to your movements here. Even if the swaying motion could be toned down a bit, it doesn't feel quite so nauseating to control it yourself, honest. It's not immediately clear though that this game is all about the puzzles. At least as far as I played, the enemies aren't a huge threat, and basically just give you something to do when you enter a new area. But to be able to make any progress, you have to interact with the environment from time to time, literally opening locked doors and raising bridges. I got stuck at one of those locked doors that I couldn't find how to open no matter what I tried. I even checked a long play and couldn't see what I was doing wrong, but other than that, I enjoyed what I saw here. 72% on Moby Games. Sometimes you can tell when a game's developers are best known for what they did on the Amiga. Zed is an RTS by the Bitmap Brothers, a fiercely independent British developer that was renowned for making games in a variety of genres that were always excellent, stylish, and funny in their own unique way. This PlayStation release only came out in Europe, and was of course published by Sony when it did. The opening fools you into thinking there's going to be any real plot, but this is pure and simple red team versus blue team for no reason. The goal here is simple. The map is divided into a grid of areas to capture, each with different resources that can help you out if they're yours, and your objective is to either wipe out the enemy or capture their fort. Simple is not easy though, and I fear my lack of RTS experience may make my footage a bit embarrassing if you are in the know. I get how this works, I like how it works, I'd like to see more of it, but I'm simply not geared for constantly checking my unit generator's cooldowns and where the vehicles are and what my opponent's doing and whether it makes sense to attack or defend and oh no, now I only have one square left and I've lost. 79% on Moby Games.
Help! Help!
Robot manufactured.
Grunts reporting. Grenades collected.
Territory lost.
They're all over us! Oh my god! No problem.
Robot manufactured. Territory lost.
Vehicle captured.
I feel like I've done pretty well on holding off the kitschy one-liners, but allow me this one. If you made a deal with the devil to get a PlayStation game released, this is probably what you'd end up with. Spawn the Eternal suffered a pretty lengthy development process by the standards of the time, with the project starting at Sony Interactive Studios America back in 1995, before being completely retooled in 1996 to make it more like Tomb Raider. It then missed the August 1997 release date to go alongside the Spawn movie, and didn't make it out until December. And unfortunately those delays didn't really help. This is an ugly, unappealing game where you stomp around claustrophobic hallways, kick boxes and bins to maybe get power-ups, mostly not though, jump twice your own height when the linear corridors ask you to, and solve the most basic puzzles imaginable by finding the switch on the wall that you activate with the button that's only used to press switches on the wall. There's nothing really going on in the exploration part, but this is a game of two halves. Whenever an enemy sees you, the camera pulls awkwardly to a side-on view, and you're treated to an extremely clunky fighting game for the combat. After taking down one enemy, it's back to the corridors until the next open square and next combat encounter. If the boss kills you with his powerful punches and homing projectiles, there's no checkpoints, and you, respawn with half health. Diabolical. 34% on Moby Games. Astute viewers may notice that Adidas Power Soccer 2 is, confoundingly, the third Adidas Power Soccer game. I guess if International 97 was an expansion, this is the full sequel Europeans were begging for, and Psygnosis were happy to oblige. That said, the series has undergone a few changes, with a new developer and also a significantly reduced presence of the Adidas brand. I'd almost be comfortable just calling this Power Soccer 2 if the main menu is anything to go by. The options are about the same as International 97, with a healthy amount of national teams and European countries having some club representation as well, but the game itself is massively different and feels extremely weird. Contrary to the previous games, which felt a bit too slow, this game is absurdly fast instead. Players zip around the pitch at max speed, but there's no analog control on offer here, so if you're trying to steal the ball, you'll never end up where you're aiming for, and dribbling when you do have the ball makes your opponents look like the Tails to your Sonic. It's especially weird because the physics on the ball itself don't feel particularly sped up. Like if you cross it or do anything else aerial, it doesn't feel like you're watching on fast forward or anything like that. But anyone waiting to receive it is bouncing off the walls, and the clock's running like it's late for itself. It's uncanny to watch, isn't it? 68% on Moby Games.
Both teams are struggling to find their form. Another goal now will give them a cushion.
A title that's as fun to say as it is a game to play, Elemental Gearbolt is the obvious follow-up to Project Horned Owl, which we looked at in the last video. I mean, if you've covered police fighting terrorists in a modern city, where else is there to go other than a science fantasy world where a collapsing neural network revives the dead of a class structure civil war and grafts them onto biomechanical weapons of elemental power? Play Xenoblade 3. Anyway, yes, this is a light gun game, although I'm playing it with a mouse on an emulator again. Look, I already had the physical copy of Time Crisis, and this game didn't even come out over here. I'm doing my best. The main gimmick of the gameplay here is that because you're not shooting a gun, there's no ammo, and no need to reload. Instead, you can freely switch between 3 different elemental weapons, each with their own rate of fire and attack power. I kind of found that with the mouse, there's no reason to ever switch off the fire attack, though. It's just a case of pointing and clicking anything you want dead. But there's a lot going on, a lot to look at, and a lot to listen to anyway, so that's not a complaint. It's good if the shooting's a bit easy though, as after each stage you can choose to convert some of your score into experience points to level up and become stronger. The biggest mistake I made was probably picking the North American version to play here. Not only was it the Japanese version that's published by Sony, but because the localization was a working designs joint, it makes this version a lot more difficult, including kicking me back to the menu after the first few levels. I wanted to keep going, and that should say it all about how good this really is. 78% on Moby Games. And so, in a nice bit of serendipity, finding out about the game that started off this video also clued me into the game that would go on to finish it. I'm not really thrilled about bookending this video with something I know has become tough to separate the art from the artist with, but it's not my fault Sony published a couple of games about it in Japan almost 30 years ago. Juyushi Inbohen, or Conspiracy of the 10 Braves, is a full-on RPG based on the Rurouni Kenshin manga, and unfortunately has not received an English translation of any sort, so I'm afraid you're watching me use Google Lens to read everything once again. Through some research, I learned that this is a pretty interesting take on the series, where you play as an original character who suffers from amnesia and ends up on an adventure around Japan, meeting and recruiting the cast from the manga along the way. After checking out literally every building in town except the one I needed to go to, I was sent through a tutorial battle at the dojo to learn how combat works. It's pretty much rock, paper, scissors, but you input a string of commands that all play out sequentially, and you're told a few of the enemy's next moves to counter and get at least a couple of hits in per turn. It's kind of a weird system to imagine a whole RPG working with, but with as much as I saw, it seemed like a decently fun system, especially if you happen to predict the entire turn correctly and kill an enemy in one go. As you might not be surprised to find out, I couldn't find any reviews for this game. And that's going to do it for 1997. To me, this felt like the year that Sony's output on the console really came into its own. I'm not just saying that because one of the generation's defining games is on the list today, but it certainly doesn't hurt, and it helps prove my point that the Sony publishing label can now be associated with some of its first truly blockbuster games. That status gave them a real three-pronged assault when it came to the games they could publish going forward. The publishing agreements with domestic developers and for international distribution could guarantee the PlayStation as a home for games that might not otherwise exist, or bring them to a wider audience than might have been possible otherwise. Sony's own developers in Japan and America were getting to grips with the hardware by now, and pumping out fantastic games on every scale. And my beloved Psygnosis were there to bring some Sony back into the offbeat, the niche, the European, to help keep the PlayStation cool as well as mainstream. But this isn't about me. What does the scientific evidence say? Punching the numbers for the games I was able to find review scores for today gives us an average score across 1997 of 74.1%. The median, if you prefer that for your average, was 75%. Whichever you choose, it's the highest scoring year on average so far. That's a particularly good achievement considering that this year's worst scoring game is the lowest we've seen in the series by a considerable margin, with Spawn the Eternal getting just 34%. Once again though, there's also a record set on the high end, with Final Fantasy VII scoring 92%, to sit at the new highest scoring Sony published game on the PlayStation to date. A big year in the bag for Sony then, but there's even more to come. See you next time for 1998.